All right, so you guys wanted to know more about Constantine's conversion to Christianity. Huge moment in history, right? We're using this awesome YouTube video from Real History to kind of guide us. And honestly, it's like we're on a historical treasure hunt. We're going to be looking at evidence and symbols and even architecture to figure out the truth.
It's easy to think about Constantine.
Then we have Constantine entering the picture. He's super ambitious and he's trying to take power during a super chaotic time for the Roman Empire. The video talks about his dad dying, the whole power struggle with Maxentius, and that crazy battle at the Milvian Bridge. That's a pretty intense setup for a conversion story, don't you think?
Definitely. Constantine's rise to power was anything but peaceful. So when his dad, Constantius, died, the army declared Constantine the new ruler. That started this brutal fight for control, which ultimately led to the battle at the Milvian Bridge against Maxentius, and that's where the traditional conversion story comes in.
Yeah, the one they taught us in school. Constantine sees a vision of the cross, maybe he has a dream about Jesus, and bam, divine intervention helps him win the battle. But then the video throws the curveball with the Arch of Constantine. You'd think a monument for this massive victory would be covered in Christian symbols.
Right.
You would think. But instead we see all these pagan gods, like Tiber, Victory, Roma. It's almost like he's trying to appeal to everyone. That's so interesting. There's even a part on the arch where they've removed Constantine's face. It's like someone tried to erase him from history. What's that all about?
It just goes to show you how much debate there is around Constantine. Even back then, people questioned what he believed and what his motives were. An arch that's supposed to celebrate him turns into this battleground about how we understand history.
That makes me think about something the video brought up. Were there even enough Christians in Constantine's army to matter? Like, if Christianity was still so small and persecuted, why would he even care about winning them over?
Good question. It doesn't seem like trying to get the support of a small group of Christian soldiers would be a good strategy for him.
But then the video talks about that discovery at Hadrian's Wall in northern England. 7 crosses carved into a wall at a Roman military fort. Does that mean there were already Christians in the army way before Constantine?
It seems that way, and what's interesting is how deliberate it looks. The way those crosses are grouped together makes it seem like they had a real sense of community, like a shared faith even within the army. So it's looking more likely that there were definitely Christians in Constantine's army.
Okay. I'm starting to see how complicated this all is.
Yeah.
But the video also mentioned that Maxentius probably had Christians in his army too. So it's not like Constantine was the only one with Christian support.
Exactly. It makes you question if Constantine converted just to get more votes, so to speak. There has to be more to the story than that.
Which brings us to another thing. The video challenges the idea that Maxentius was just this evil pagan tyrant who was against Christians.
We always got to remember that history is written by the winners. The video talks about how they recently found some of Maxentius's personal stuff, things like scepters and spears and weapons, things his followers probably really valued. This paints a more complex picture of him. He wasn't just some cartoon villain.
So maybe Constantine was twisting the story to make himself look better. Making Maxentius look like the bad guy would make Constantine the good guy.
It's definitely possible. And when you think about it, Constantine's own arch is full of pagan imagery, which makes you wonder about how committed he really was to Christianity.
Then things get really wild when they start talking about Mithraism.
Mithraism is super important for understanding this whole story. It was this secret religion only for men, and it was really popular with Roman elites, especially in the military. It's possible that Mithraism existed alongside and even influenced early Christianity.
The video makes this really interesting comparison. You have evidence of regular soldiers being drawn to Christianity at Hadrian's Wall. And then at the same time, you have Roman officers nearby practicing this exclusive Mithras cult. It's like 2 completely different worlds crashing into each other.
And those worlds might have been closer than we think. The fact that they found a Mithraic temple near the Christian soldier fort is a pretty big clue. It shows that different levels of Roman society were attracted to different religions, even though they were right next to each other.
What was it like to be inside one of these Mithraic temples? The video uses Santa Prisca Church in Rome as an example. It sounds kind of intense, dark rooms, flickering torches, and an altar with Mithras killing a bull.
Yeah, it was meant to be an intense experience, or really ritualistic space. And at the heart of it was this myth about Mithras, who is the sun god. He sacrifices a bull to create the world. It's a story about power and sacrifice and renewal, themes you see in a lot of religions, including Christianity.
And then there's that inscription about salvation through the shedding of the eternal blood. That sounds a lot like some Christian beliefs, doesn't it?
Yeah, the similarities are pretty obvious. Mithraism had a ritual meal just like communion in Christianity. They also believed that Mithras died and came back to life just like Jesus. And here's the big one. They celebrated Mithras' birthday on December 25th.
Wait, seriously? Could Christmas have originally been a Mithraic holiday? That's crazy.
It's a theory that a lot of historians are starting to take seriously. And when you think about all the other connections, it doesn't seem that weird that some parts of this older religion were absorbed into Christianity.
Which leads to this even bigger theory, that some Mithraic imagery ended up in early Christian art, and maybe even in the Gospels.
Now we're getting into the real mystery. The video focuses on this mosaic at the Church of St. Apollinaire Nuovo, specifically the image of the Magi, the three wise men. What's so special about them? They're wearing Phrygian caps. Those are the hats that the Mithraic priests wore.
Hold on, the Magi were like proto-Mithraic priests. That's like finding a hidden message right in front of everyone. And it doesn't stop there. Remember how Constantine's arch is surrounded by those 8 figures that look like the Magi? They're wearing those same Phrygian caps?
It's a small detail, but it's important. It shows that the line between Mithraism and early Christianity wasn't as clear as we think. And it makes you wonder, how much did this older, more established religion shape Christian imagery?
Okay, so we've got this puzzle, right? Mithraism is popular, especially with the military elites, but somehow Constantine convinces everyone he's this devout Christian. Even though there's all this pagan imagery everywhere, how does that even happen?
Well, that's where Eusebius comes in. He was Constantine's biographer, basically his right-hand man in the Christian world. To understand how the story of Constantine's conversion got so big, we got to look at what Eusebius wrote.
And here's where things get really interesting. At first, Eusebius doesn't even mention the vision at the Milvian Bridge. Like it never happened.
Exactly. It's not until years later at this big fancy banquet that Constantine throws for all the Christian leaders that we hear about the vision for the first time. And get this, the story is told by Constantine himself, a whole 13 years after the battle happened. Seems a little convenient, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a little fishy. So we've got Constantine basically rewriting history at a dinner party. And Eusebius is so impressed by this powerful emperor that he writes about him like he's some kind of divine figure.
When you read Eusebius's work, you can really feel how much he admired Constantine. He uses language that's usually reserved for religious figures to describe him. It's obvious that he totally believed Constantine's story.
And from there, this embellished version of the conversion just becomes the accepted truth. It even shows up in art like Raphael's frescoes. It's crazy how a story can change how we understand the past once it takes hold.
It really shows how narratives, especially ones pulled by the winners, shape how we view history. In this case, the story about Constantine's dramatic conversion becomes the foundation for how we see Christianity's rise to power in Rome.
So what was Constantine really trying to do? If we can't trust the vision story, what were his real motives?
That's the million-dollar question. The video has this really interesting theory. Maybe Constantine was trying to create this super religion by mixing Mithraism and Christianity. It would have been a genius move to increase his power, even if it was kind of messed up.
And it's not just the imagery that he repurposed. Remember those recycled reliefs on the Arch of Constantine? The images of emperors like Marcus Aurelius, Trajan, and Hadrian. It's almost like he's trying to put himself in the same category as those legendary leaders.
Exactly. It's a way for him to show how ambitious he is. Constantine wasn't happy just being another emperor. He wanted to be remembered as one of the greats. By connecting himself to figures like Trajan and Hadrian, he's making a statement. He wants to create a legacy that'll last forever.
But if he wasn't really a devout Christian, like the traditional story says, then where was he getting his inspiration? Maybe the answer is right there on the arch. You've got the inscription, Instincto Divinitatis, which means by divine inspiration. And of course, that giant image of the sun god Apollo.
You're right to focus on those details. They definitely suggest that Constantine thought he was chosen by something, but not necessarily by the Christian god. The video makes these really cool connections between Apollo, Mithras, and how Constantine presented himself. They're all associated with ideas of light, power, and creation.
And then you have that massive statue of Constantine with this huge head and that possible radiant crown, almost like a halo. Again, it's all about creating this godlike image.
What's striking is that he doesn't seem to have any humility. He wants to be worshipped. This wasn't a guy who wanted to blend in. He wanted everyone to see him as this divine figure, someone to be adored.
Okay, let's just pause for a second. We started with this simple story about Constantine's conversion, but now we're talking about pagan gods secret cults, and an emperor who might have changed history to make himself look better. Where do we even go from here?
Well, I think it's time we took a trip to Constantinople, Constantine's brand new capital city. The city itself reflects his ambitions and his complicated relationship with religion.
Constantinople, huh? So if Constantine was this devout Christian emperor, you'd think his new capital would be the center of Christianity, right? With churches everywhere and stuff.
That's what you'd expect. But the video points out something kind of ironic. The most important feature of the city wasn't a church at all. It was this giant column with a statue of, you guessed it, Apollo on top.
Oh, wow. That's pretty ironic. Here's this emperor who supposedly started this new era of Christianity. But he chooses a pagan sun god for his city's biggest monument. It's like he's trying to have it both ways.
It's definitely a weird contradiction, and it gets even weirder when you hear what the video says about the statue. Apparently, Constantine replaced Apollo's face with his own...
Whoa, hold on. Talk about a power move. It's like he's becoming the sun god, taking all of Apollo's power and status for himself. And then to make things even stranger, he might have even put a relic of the true cross inside the statue.
Yeah, we're talking about a statue of Constantine as Apollo, but with a piece of the true cross thrown in for good measure. It's this crazy mix of pagan and Christian symbolism.
This makes me think that maybe Constantine wasn't just trying to convert everyone to Christianity. Maybe he wanted to create something totally new, something that combined ideas from both paganism and Christianity.
It's a really interesting theory. And it ties into another detail about the placement of Constantine's arch back in Rome. The video mentions that it's actually off-center from the original road. The Romans were such good builders, they wouldn't make a mistake like that on accident.
Yeah, I remember that part. There had to be a reason for that weird placement.
And that reason might have something to do with the arch's connection to another huge monument, the statue of Apollo that was right behind it.
Oh, this is where things get really crazy. The expert in the video, Elizabeth Marlowe, is an architectural historian who specializes in Roman stuff. She basically built a replica of everything in her living room to figure out why the arch was off-center. And she found out that it was placed perfectly to frame the Colossus of Apollo behind it.
Marlowe's work is so cool. She shows how, depending on where you were standing, Apollo would either look like he was towering over Constantine, or that Constantine was blocking him out. It's this intentional visual game between the emperor and the sun god.
That's incredible. On the surface, it looks like he's honoring Apollo. But by putting the arch in that specific spot, he's actually putting himself in a position of power over the god.
It's subtle, but it's a definite power move.
It seems like every time we think we're getting close to figuring Constantine out, we uncover another layer of weirdness. So we've got this arch that's subtly positioned to be more powerful than Apollo. But there's more to it than that, right? The video talks about how the arch is right next to buildings that were built by the Flavian emperors. Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Those were the emperors who destroyed the Jerusalem temple, weren't they?
They were, and they were known for persecuting Christians. It's a pretty significant connection. Makes you wonder why Constantine, who was supposed to be this defender of Christianity, would build his arch so close to monuments built by people who hated the faith.
It's definitely strange. And then you add the fact that Constantine even took the Flavian name for himself, calling himself Flavius Constantinus. It almost seems like he's trying to connect himself to those emperors, but also maybe trying to do something even bigger for Christianity than they did.
Maybe he was making a statement. It's like he's saying, you guys might have destroyed the temple, but I'm going to completely change the faith itself. Which reminds me of that idea from the video that Constantine was trying to defeat Jesus by transforming him, basically turning him from this symbol of rebellion against Rome into a symbol of Roman power.
Whoa, that's a heavy thought. It challenges this whole idea of Constantine being a simple convert. Maybe he was playing a much bigger game, using Christianity to make his own power stronger and reshape the whole empire.
Exactly. And you can see that idea reflected in how Jesus is portrayed in art after Constantine. The video shows this 6th century mosaic from Ravenna, Italy, where Jesus is dressed up as a Roman soldier. He even looks kind of like an emperor.
It's incredible how powerful images can be. In just a few hundred years, Jesus went from being an enemy of Rome to being its symbol. Makes you think about the images we see today and the stories they tell. But going back to Constantine, we've seen how he used architecture to outsmart Apollo and how he connected himself to emperors who persecuted Christians. And then there's his burial plan. He wanted to be buried with the 12 apostles like he was taking Jesus' place. Is there anything this guy didn't do?
Well, we still haven't answered the biggest question of all. What did Constantine really believe? Was he even a Christian? Or was he something else entirely? The video makes a pretty bold claim that Constantine ultimately put his faith in the sun, not in Jesus.
That's a bold statement. But when you think about all the evidence, the constant Apollo references, that radiant crown on his statue, the placement of his arch, it kind of makes sense.
Remember, Constantine was part of the imperial cult before he supposedly converted. This cult worshipped the emperor as a god and often linked him with Apollo, the sun god. It seems like he never really let go of that way of thinking, even after he supposedly became a Christian.
So basically, he took the imperial cult, where the emperor was this godlike figure, and just swapped out Apollo for Jesus. That's pretty smart. It let him use both pagan and Christian traditions to make himself more powerful, while still appearing to be a devout Christian. But does that mean he wasn't a true believer?
That's a question that historians have been arguing about for centuries. Some people think he was totally sincere. They point to his support for the church and his role in the Council of Nicaea, which helped establish some of the most important Christian beliefs.
But then there are other people who think he was just a really good politician. They think he saw how popular Christianity was becoming and decided to use it to his advantage. It sounds like he was a pretty complicated guy.
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Constantine was definitely ambitious and wanted to leave a lasting mark on the world. But he might have also genuinely believed in something bigger than himself, even if his beliefs were a little unusual. Maybe he thought he was chosen to unite the empire under a new faith, a faith that he helped create.
It's almost like he made his own version of Christianity, one that was heavily influenced by paganism and put the emperor at the center of it all. That's what makes Constantine's story so interesting, right? He wasn't just converting to some already existing religion. He was actively shaping and changing Christianity to fit his own vision and goals. It's like he was an architect, not just of Constantinople, but of this new religious system that would change the Western world forever. We've come a long way from that simple story about his conversion, haven't we?
We have. This deep dive has shown us how complex and mysterious Constantine's story really is. It's a good reminder that history is rarely black and white. There are always different interpretations, hidden motives, and shades of gray. It's up to us to look at the evidence and decide what we believe.
So what does all of this mean for us today as we try to understand Constantine's legacy? What are your final thoughts on this whole deep dive?
I think it challenges us to question everything we think we know about the past, to look deeper and consider different points of view. And it reminds us that even the biggest moments in history are usually driven by a lot of different things, some good, some not so good. We can appreciate what Constantine accomplished while also recognizing how complicated and contradictory his reign was. He might not have been the saint that some people make him out to be, but he was definitely a powerful leader who changed the course of history.
That's a great point. His story also reminds us how powerful narratives are and how they can be used to push certain agendas. It encourages us to think critically, to question what we're told, and to always search for the truth, even when it's difficult and messy. So what stood out to you in this deep dive? Was Constantine a true believer or a master manipulator? I think the answer might depend on how you define Christianity. Was it the faith of Jesus and his early followers? Or was it something new, something created within the world of Roman power and politics that blended pagan and Christian beliefs? That's something to think about as we keep exploring the mysteries of history.
And remember, history is a conversation that never really ends. There's always more to learn and discover, so keep asking questions, keep searching, and keep diving deep. You never know what you might find.